What would you do if everything you built, your success, your reputation, even your life's work, started to feel like it was quietly pulling you away from what truly matters? Would you ignore it? Would you justify it? Or would you have the courage to walk away, knowing that everything you leave behind is what most people spend their entire lives chasing? That's the tension at the center of Francis Chan's story. And it's not just a story about a pastor. It's about identity, about loss, about truth, about the quiet, unsettling realization that sometimes the very things that look like blessings can slowly become distractions. And perhaps the deeper question is this: how do you know when success has started to cost you something more valuable than it gives? Francis Chan's life didn't begin with clarity or comfort. It began with loss, raw, immediate, and irreversible. Born in 1967 in San Francisco, his first moment in the world was marked by tragedy. His mother died during childbirth. There were no memories to hold on to, no stories to revisit, no photographs to soften the absence. Just a silence, a permanent void that would follow him through every stage of life. How does a child grow up understanding that? How do you reconcile the idea of love when your very first experience is loss? His father, suddenly alone in a foreign country, faced a reality he wasn't prepared for. Raising 3 children while navigating grief and survival proved overwhelming. Eventually, he made a difficult decision, one that would reshape Francis's childhood entirely. Francis was sent to Hong Kong to live with his grandmother. And just like that, everything changed. Hong Kong wasn't just a new location. It was a completely different world. The sounds, the language, the rhythms of daily life, all unfamiliar. But perhaps most striking was the spiritual environment. His grandmother practiced Buddhist traditions deeply rooted in ritual and reverence for unseen forces. At night, Francis would lie on thin mats, staring into the dark, listening to distant chants echoing through the air. The scent of incense lingered constantly, and he would watch as offerings were burned, food, paper money, symbolic items meant for those who had passed on. To a child already carrying confusion and grief, this world felt mysterious, and sometimes frightening. What did it all mean? Were the spirits real? Was his mother somewhere out there, watching? Or was she simply gone? These weren't questions with easy answers. And for Francis, they became part of an inner dialogue that never fully disappeared. Eventually, he returned to the United States. For a brief moment, life seemed to stabilize. There was structure again, a sense of normalcy trying to rebuild itself. But that fragile stability didn't last. At the age of 8, tragedy struck again. His stepmother died in a violent car accident. Another loss. Another rupture. Before he could fully process that, life delivered an even deeper blow. At 12 years old, on his birthday, his father died of cancer. Think about that moment. A day meant for celebration turned into a memory defined by hospital walls, fading machines, and final breaths. No candles. No laughter. Just silence. What does that do to a child's understanding of the world? What happens to your sense of security when the people meant to anchor your life keep disappearing? By the time Francis reached his teenage years, nearly every close family member had been taken from him. And the tragedies didn't stop there. In another devastating event, his uncle murdered his wife before taking his own life. Violence, grief, and confusion intertwined in ways that were impossible to ignore. Death wasn't distant or theoretical. It was immediate, personal, relentless. So naturally, the question began to form, quiet at first, then louder with time. If God is real, why does life break so easily? For many people, that kind of pain creates distance from faith. It builds walls. It leads to doubt, anger, even rejection. But for Francis, something unexpected happened. Instead of pushing him away, the questions pulled him closer. Not because he had answers, but because he needed them. In college, a shift began. It wasn't dramatic at first. There was no single moment of clarity, no sudden transformation. Instead, it was gradual, a growing awareness that life, fragile as it was, demanded deeper meaning. He began to explore Christianity seriously. Not casually, not culturally, but with urgency. If life could end so quickly, then what truly mattered? If everything could be taken away, what remained? These questions drove him forward. He committed himself fully to his faith and pursued theological studies with intensity. On the surface, it looked like purpose had replaced confusion. But beneath that surface, another tension was quietly building. His public life began to grow. He was teaching, leading, speaking about faith, purity, and commitment. People listened. People respected him. But privately, something didn't feel right. There was a gap, a subtle but persistent disconnect between what he was teaching and how he was living. Have you ever felt that? That quiet discomfort of saying the right things, but knowing something isn't aligned inside? At first, it was easy to ignore. Easy to justify. After all, no one is perfect, right? But over time, that tension became impossible to silence. It wasn't just about behavior. It was about authenticity. Was he living the truth he was preaching? Or was he performing it? Eventually, the weight of that question became too heavy to carry. So he made a decision that surprised everyone around him. He stepped away. No announcements. No explanations. No attempts to protect his image. He simply walked away from ministry. And then he did something even more unexpected. He became a waiter. From preaching sermons to taking food orders. From leading people to serving tables. From visibility to obscurity. To the outside world, it looked like a step backward, a loss of direction, perhaps even a failure. But for Francis, it was something entirely different. It was honesty. For the first time in a long time, there was no pressure to perform. No expectations to meet. No audience to impress. Just space. Space to think. Space to confront himself. Space to ask the questions he had been avoiding. Who am I when no one is watching? What does faith look like without a platform? Is my identity tied to what I do, or who I am? During that season, something began to rebuild. Not quickly. Not perfectly. But genuinely. He made a quiet decision, one that would shape everything that followed. He would stop performing, and start living authentically. Around this time, he met Lisa. Their relationship wasn't built on image or ambition. It was grounded in reality. Two people navigating life, questions, and faith together. They married, and slowly, they began to build something steady. Not perfect. Not easy. But real. And perhaps that's what made it strong. Then, in 1994, they took a step that would once again change everything. They started a church. Not in a grand building. Not with a strategic plan. In a garage. Picture it. A small space. Folding chairs. A handful of people gathered, not because of marketing or reputation, but because something about it felt different. There was no performance. No polished production. Just honesty. And that honesty drew people in. The church began to grow. At first, gradually. Then rapidly. People were hungry, not just for information, but for something real. Something urgent. Something that felt alive. Within a few years, the small garage gathering transformed into a megachurch with thousands attending weekly. From the outside, it looked like undeniable success. Influence. Growth. Recognition. Everything a leader is supposed to want. But inside, something didn't sit right. Let's pause here and ask a difficult question. Is bigger always better? Or can growth sometimes hide deeper problems? As the church expanded, Francis began to notice something troubling. People were showing up. They were listening. They were nodding along. And then, they were leaving. Unchanged. Week after week. The pattern repeated itself. Attendance increased, but transformation didn't seem to match it. Were they participating in faith, or just observing it? This realization unsettled him. Deeply. Because it forced him to confront a possibility he didn't want to accept. What if the very system he helped build was limiting the kind of faith he believed in? He began to ask harder questions. Would Jesus have built something like this? Would the early church have looked like a weekly event, or a daily, sacrificial community? Had church become something people attended, rather than something they lived? These weren't abstract thoughts. They stayed with him. They followed him home. They interrupted his peace. At the same time, His influence extended beyond the church. His book, Crazy Love, became a massive success. Millions of copies sold. Global recognition. Invitations, opportunities, financial security beyond what he had ever imagined. From the outside, it looked like everything was aligning perfectly. But internally, the tension only grew stronger. Because success has a way of asking a quiet question. What will you do with me? Francis made a decision that few people would understand. He gave it all away. Every dollar earned from the book. Not partially. Not symbolically. Completely. Why would someone do that? Why walk away from financial security when you've already experienced so much loss in life? Because he feared something. Not failure. Not obscurity. But something far more subtle and far more dangerous. He feared that success might slowly replace sincerity. That comfort might dull conviction. That influence might become an identity rather than a responsibility. So while others upgraded their lifestyles, he chose simplicity. While others built safety nets, he let go of them. Not because it was easy, but because he believed it was necessary. And then came the moment that shocked everyone. In 2010, at the height of his influence, standing before thousands of people who respected and followed him, Francis Chan made an announcement. He was stepping down. No gradual transition. No carefully structured exit plan. No attempt to maintain control behind the scenes. Just a decision. Clear. Final. Uncomfortable. Imagine being in that room. Hearing those words. Feeling the confusion ripple through the crowd. Why would someone walk away from this? From impact. From influence. From success. But for Francis, the question looked different. How could he stay? He believed that the system, despite its growth, wasn't producing the kind of faith he saw in Scripture. People were attending, but not engaging. Listening, but not living. And he couldn't ignore that anymore. So he left. Not because he had all the answers, but because he was willing to follow the questions. And maybe that's where his story becomes more than just his. Because at some point, everyone faces a version of this tension. The moment when what looks successful on the outside doesn't feel right on the inside. The moment when you have to ask, am I building something meaningful, or just something impressive? Am I living truth, or performing it? And most importantly, if everything in my life is pulling me in one direction, but my convictions are pulling me in another, which one will I follow? These aren't just abstract questions. They are the kind that quietly grow louder over time, until ignoring them becomes impossible. And for Francis Chan, that moment eventually came. So he walked away. But pause for a second. What would it actually take for you to leave something like that behind? The applause. The stability. The identity you spent years building. Most people don't walk away from success. They protect it. Expand it. Wrap their lives around it. Because once you've built something impressive, doesn't it feel like losing it would mean losing a part of yourself? Yet for Chan, staying began to feel more dangerous than leaving. From the outside, everything looked right. He had influence, a growing platform, and the respect of thousands. But internally, something didn't sit right. The more successful things became, the more he began to question whether the outward growth was masking an inward drift. Have you ever felt that tension? When everything looks like it's working, but something inside whispers that it isn't. After stepping down, Chan chose a path that confused many and inspired others. He didn't move toward something bigger. He moved toward something smaller. Much smaller. He began spending time in tight-knit communities. House churches. Living rooms filled with ordinary people rather than large auditoriums filled with spectators. No stage. No spotlight. Just people, talking, praying, sharing life in its rawest form. At first glance, it sounded almost romantic. A return to simplicity. A stripping away of excess. But reality quickly proved otherwise. It wasn't perfect. In fact, it was messy in ways large institutions often hide. Without structure to buffer conflict, disagreements surfaced more quickly. Relationships became more intense. Expectations weren't abstract, they were personal. Some people left, not because they didn't care, but because it demanded more than they anticipated. And that raises a question most people don't ask. Do we actually want authenticity, or just the idea of it? Because real, unfiltered community often comes with discomfort. For Chan, though, the mess didn't discourage him. If anything, it confirmed that he was closer to something real. And to him, that mattered more than polished success ever could. Still, his journey didn't become easier. If anything, it became more complicated. In later years, new controversies began to surface. He appeared alongside religious figures that many of his followers distrusted. He shared stories of miracles, stories that some found inspiring, while others found difficult to believe. He even revisited long-held beliefs, including his views on communion, in ways that surprised and unsettled those who had followed him for years. Suddenly, the man once seen as a clear and steady voice became harder to define. Some called it growth. Others called it confusion. Some admired his willingness to change. Others questioned whether he had lost his way. So what actually changed? Was he drifting? Or was he continuing to follow his convictions, even when they led him somewhere unpopular? That question doesn't just apply to him. It applies to all of us. Do we only support conviction when it aligns with our expectations? Or are we willing to accept that a genuine search for truth can lead people into places we don't fully understand or agree with? Because the reality is, growth is rarely neat. It doesn't follow a straight line. And sometimes, the deeper someone searches, the more complex their journey becomes. Behind all the public decisions, there was something deeply personal driving Chan's choices. He later admitted that one of his greatest fears wasn't failure. It was success. That might sound strange at first. After all, isn't success what everyone is striving for? But think about it. Success brings admiration, attention, influence. And with those things comes something subtle, but powerful. Validation. Chan realized something unsettling within himself. He liked it. He liked being admired. He liked being listened to. He liked being seen as someone who had answers. And that realization scared him. Because the more people focused on him, the easier it became to lose focus on what he originally cared about. Have you ever noticed how easily purpose can shift when recognition enters the picture? What starts as something genuine can slowly become something performative, without you even realizing it. So Chan made a decision that very few people make. He chose obscurity over recognition. Not because he had to, but because he believed he needed to. That choice, however, didn't come without consequences. His family felt the weight of it. Raising 7 children is already a challenge. But doing so while navigating constant change, uncertainty, relocation, emotional pressure, added another layer entirely. His wife later shared the quieter side of the story. The exhaustion, the strain, the moments of doubt that didn't make it into public conversations. And that brings up another uncomfortable question. What is the real cost of living a life of conviction? Not just for you, but for the people closest to you. Because every decision we make doesn't exist in isolation. It ripples outward, affecting relationships, stability, and the lives intertwined with our own. From knowing that, even if the path is uncertain, it feels honest. And maybe that's the heart of his story. Not perfection. Not clarity. But honesty. So where does that leave us? Maybe this story isn't just about faith, leadership, or controversy. Maybe it's about something deeper, something more universal. About questioning what success really means. About recognizing when something that once felt meaningful starts to feel hollow. About paying attention to the quiet signals we often ignore. And most importantly, about having the courage to walk away. Not when things fall apart, but when they seem to be working perfectly, and yet something inside tells you they shouldn't be. So let me ask you this. If everything in your life looked successful on the outside, but felt misaligned on the inside, would you have the courage to change it? Or would you keep going, because it's easier? Because it's safer? Because it's what people expect? That's the tension Chan chose to face. And whether you agree with his decisions or not, whether you see his journey as inspiring or complicated, his story forces one undeniable question. Are we chasing what truly matters? Or just what looks like it does?